Please accept this pure bride." The rancher froze when she held his hand like she already knew him. Daniel Harper had always been a man of routine. His life on the ranch was simple, quiet, and predictable. From sunrise to sunset, he worked with the animals, mended fences, and tended to the fields with a careful and steady hand. People in town often called him distant, sometimes even cold, but the truth was far different. Daniel had been hurt in the past. He had loved once, long ago, and the pain of losing someone dear had left a mark on his heart. Since then, he had avoided relationships, believing that keeping distance was safer than risking loss again. The ranch had become his home, his comfort, and his sanctuary. The mornings were always calm, with a soft golden light spilling over the hills, and the smell of fresh hay filling the air. Daniel would rise early, drink his coffee, and walk through the fields, checking on the horses and cattle. He preferred solitude. It allowed him to think and find peace in the rhythm of his daily tasks. Even the townspeople knew better than to disturb him unless it was urgent. He liked it that way. Life was easier when it was predictable. But that calm, quiet life was about to change in a way Daniel could never have imagined. It was a crisp morning when a stranger appeared at the ranch gate. Daniel had been repairing the fence near the east pasture, hammer in hand, when he noticed the old carriage slowly coming down the dusty road. At first he thought it was a traveler or someone lost, but as it drew closer he realized it was an elderly woman, dressed in simple but neat clothing, and a young girl standing beside her. The girl's face was soft and serene, with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Daniel paused mid-swing of the hammer, instinctively sensing that this visit was unlike any other he had received. When the carriage stopped, the elderly woman stepped down first. She smiled gently, and there was a calm, quiet authority in her movements. The young girl followed, standing tall yet humble. Daniel wiped his hands on his worn jeans and approached the gate cautiously. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady but curious. The woman bowed slightly, her eyes kind and steady. "I hope so," she said softly. "My name is Mrs. Whitmore, and this is Lila. She is in need of a place to stay, and I thought perhaps you might consider helping her." Daniel furrowed his brow. He was no stranger to people asking for help, but there was something unusual about the way she spoke. Not desperate, not commanding, but gentle and sincere. "Stay? On my ranch?" he asked, confused. "I don't know if—" "Please," the elderly woman interrupted gently, her voice calm yet persuasive. "I know it may seem sudden. I know you live a quiet life, but Lila has nowhere left to go. She has been through much, and she believes this ranch, this place, is where she belongs. I am not asking you to marry her. Not now. Not ever. Only to give her shelter and safety. Just for a time." Daniel's hands twitched slightly at his sides. He was not used to strangers entering his life, let alone asking him to take responsibility for another person. He glanced at Lila for the first time. She did not speak immediately. She simply stepped forward and looked at him with a calmness that was almost disarming. Her eyes were gentle, yet there was an unusual depth to them, as if she had seen life's hardships but had never let them harden her heart. Then she did something Daniel could not have anticipated. Slowly, deliberately, Lila reached out and took his hand. Her touch was light, yet it carried a warmth that felt familiar in a way he could not explain. Daniel froze. His hammer slipped slightly from his grasp, and he stepped back a pace without letting go of her hand. There was something about the way she held it, like she had known him all her life, like she remembered something he had long forgotten. It was not a forceful grip, nor was it casual. It was as though their hands fitting together had been written in the stars, waiting for this moment. For a moment, Daniel felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, curiosity, and something deeper he could not name. His heart, which had long been guarded and closed, seemed to pause. Mrs. Whitmore observed silently, her hands clasped in front of her. She did not speak, yet there was an unspoken understanding that Daniel could feel. Lila's gaze remained steady, soft, and unwavering. "Please," she said in a voice barely above a whisper, yet firm in its sincerity. "I only want a safe place to stay. I don't ask for more than that." Daniel released a slow breath. He looked at the girl again. He believed in helping people when he could, but this request was extraordinary. There was no family connection, no societal expectation, no clear reason why he should accept. And yet something about the familiarity in her touch, the calm in her eyes, tugged at a part of him that had long been silent. He could not explain it, and he could not ignore it. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts inside him. "She can stay. For now, but only until we figure out what comes next. A soft smile appeared on Lila's face, gentle and grateful. She released his hand and took a small step back. Daniel felt a strange ache of anticipation, as if this simple agreement had opened a door to a new chapter he had never expected to enter. Mrs. Z. Whitmore nodded in gratitude, her eyes glistening slightly in the morning sun. Thank you, Daniel. I knew you would understand. As the elderly woman and Lila stepped toward the ranch house, Daniel's mind raced. He had spent years building walls around himself, guarding against the unpredictability of life, yet here was someone, a complete stranger, holding out trust in a way that was both humbling and unsettling. He wondered what had brought her to him, why she had chosen his ranch, why the world seemed to align for this unexpected encounter. The day passed slowly. Daniel showed Lila to a small guest room in the house, a modest space with a window overlooking the fields. She did not complain, nor did she demand anything. Instead, she arranged her few belongings with care, her movements quiet and thoughtful. Daniel found himself watching from the doorway, an unfamiliar sensation of curiosity stirring inside him. He noticed the way she paused to look out the window at the sunrise, the way she seemed to take in the ranch as if it were familiar, almost like home. By evening, the ranch had settled into its usual quiet rhythm. Daniel sat on the porch, watching the horses graze under the fading light, and found his thoughts drifting back to Lila. There was something unexplainable in her presence, something that made him question the solitude he had cherished for so long. It was as though her arrival had shifted the energy of the ranch, bringing the subtle warmth that had not been there before. That night, Daniel lay awake, thinking about the day. He replayed the moment her hand had met his, the gentle pressure, the calm recognition in her eyes. He could not understand why it had affected him so deeply, but he knew it had. For the first time in years, he felt a stirring in his heart, a small flicker of hope or curiosity about what the future might bring. And though he did not yet know what lay ahead, he understood one thing clearly. This encounter was not ordinary, and Lila's presence would change everything he had thought he knew about life, love, and the quiet routines of the ranch. The next morning, Daniel rose earlier than usual. The sun spilled gold over the fields, and the air smelled fresh with the promise of a new day. He found Lila already outside, gently brushing the coat of a horse that had long resisted attention. Her movements were confident yet tender, and her eyes sparkled with calm determination. Now, she glanced at him and smiled, a soft, quiet smile that made his chest tighten in ways he could not describe. "Good morning," he said cautiously. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," she replied, her voice calm but warm. Daniel nodded, watching her work. Something deep inside him told him that this was only the beginning. That small, quiet day had opened a door he had long thought closed, and though he could not yet imagine the path ahead, he knew that he would walk it, slowly, carefully, and perhaps with a heart that was finally learning to trust again. The ranch, once silent and predictable, had a new rhythm now, one shaped by an unexpected guest whose touch had stirred a part of Daniel he thought had long frozen. And in that gentle sunrise, with the world stretching quietly before them, Daniel Harper realized that life had a way of surprising even the most careful hearts, and that sometimes fate arrived in the simplest of gestures, a hand held, a gaze shared, a quiet request for shelter and trust. The next few days on the ranch were unlike any Daniel Harper had experienced in years. Life had always been predictable for him. Wake up early, feed the animals, repair fences, check the fields, and then retreat to the quiet of the house before sunset. But with Lila there, even the familiar routine felt different. The air seemed lighter, the sun brighter, and the small sounds of the ranch, the low whinny of a horse, the rustle of leaves in the wind, felt more alive. Lila had adjusted to the ranch with a quiet ease that surprised Daniel. Peace of mind. She never complained about the hard work, never asked for special treatment, and seemed to know exactly what needed to be done. One morning, Daniel watched her from the porch as she moved among the horses. She approached each one slowly, her hands gentle, her touch calm. Even the most stubborn horse, which often resisted Daniel's efforts, stood still as she softly stroked its neck. Daniel felt a strange mixture of amazement and disbelief. He had worked with these animals for years, learning their habits and moods, yet this young woman, someone he had just met, seemed to understand them better than he did. It was not just skill. It was an instinct, a natural way of connecting. He found himself watching her quietly, trying to figure out who she really was and what had given her such a calm presence. As the day passed, Daniel realized that Lila had a surprising knowledge of the ranch. She knew where the tools were stored, which plants were safe for the animals to eat, and even how to mend the fence in a way that made it stronger than before. Daniel, who had always prided himself on his expertise, felt both impressed and a little uneasy. How could someone so young and seemingly inexperienced know so much about a place she had never lived in? Despite the unusual circumstances, Lila never acted as if she was showing off. She worked quietly, her movements deliberate and careful, her eyes always attentive. She asked questions when she was unsure, but never demanded answers or guidance. There was a humility in her behavior that reminded Daniel of why he had always respected people who worked hard without seeking attention or praise. One evening, after a long day of work, Daniel found himself sitting on the porch again, sipping coffee and watching the sun dip behind the hills. Lila joined him quietly, carrying a small basket of freshly picked vegetables from the garden. "I would be so happy." She handed it to him without a word, smiling softly when he looked at her in surprise. "Thank you," Daniel said finally, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. "You're welcome," Lila replied, her voice gentle. "I thought you might like these. I know you like fresh vegetables for your dinner." How had she known? He had never mentioned it. Then it struck him. Her knowledge of the ranch and its routines went beyond simple observation. It was as if she had been here before, as if the ranch itself remembered her presence. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. Perhaps he was imagining it. Perhaps it was just coincidence. Over the next few days, Daniel began noticing other subtle signs of Lila's familiarity with the ranch. She could move through the fields without getting lost, even in areas where Daniel himself occasionally misstepped. She knew which areas were safe to walk and which were dangerous for the livestock. Even the smallest tasks, like filling the water troughs or feeding the chickens, she performed with a natural precision that left Daniel quietly amazed. One afternoon, as he watched her work near the barn, Daniel finally spoke. "You seem very familiar with this place," he said cautiously. "Have you ever lived on a ranch before?" Lila paused for a moment, her hands resting on a wooden fence post. She looked at him with her calm, steady gaze. "Not exactly," she said softly, "but I feel comfortable here. I feel like I know this place." Daniel frowned. Her answer was strange, almost cryptic, but there was no falsehood in her tone. She truly seemed at ease, as if the ranch had accepted her before he ever had a chance to. As the days turned into a week, the small town surrounding the ranch began to take notice of Lila's presence. Some neighbors were curious, others cautious, and a few whispered doubts about the sudden arrangement. How could a man who had avoided relationships for years suddenly take in a young woman he barely knew? Daniel ignored the gossip, focusing instead on his daily work and observing Lila and her routines. It was during this time that he noticed something even more unusual, a subtle sense of comfort in her presence that he couldn't ignore. When she spoke, her voice was calm and soothing, even when giving instructions or asking for help. When she moved around the ranch, there was a quiet confidence that made everything seem smoother, easier, and lighter. Even the animals seemed to respond to her presence, moving calmly and obediently. Daniel tried to understand the strange feelings growing inside him. Part of him felt admiration for her skills and her gentle nature. Another part felt confusion, a fluttering in his chest he could not explain. He had not felt this way about anyone in a long time, not since the loss that had made him retreat from the world. He had built walls around his heart to protect himself, and now Lila's presence seemed to chip away at them gently, brick by brick. One evening, as the sky turned a deep orange and pink, Daniel found himself walking with Lila to check on the cattle grazing on the far side of the field. The air was cool, the wind soft, and for the first time in years he felt a sense of peace in sharing a task with someone else. "You move quietly," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The animals don't even notice you." Lila smiled faintly. "I like to observe first," she replied. "Rushing never helps. You have to understand the place, the animals, and the land before you act." Her words were simple but wise, and he found himself thinking deeply about them. She spoke as if she understood more than just the surface of things. She seemed to understand the rhythm of life, the connection between people, animals, and the land. That night, after a long day, Daniel sat alone on the porch, thinking about Lila and the strange sense of familiarity she brought with her. He remembered the first day she had held his hand, a touch so light yet so full of meaning that it had unsettled him. He replayed the memory over and over, trying to make sense of it. Why did it feel like he had known her for years? Why did her presence feel comforting, almost like coming home after a long absence? He shook his head, telling himself he was imagining things. Perhaps it was just the kindness of the girl, or perhaps his heart, long unused to companionship, was reacting to the smallest sign of care. Still, the feeling lingered, persistent and undeniable. The following morning, Daniel woke earlier than usual. He found Lila already outside, feeding the chickens with careful, practiced movements. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the fields in soft shades of gold and pink. She glanced up and caught his eye, smiling warmly. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Good morning," Daniel replied, feeling the warmth of her gaze settle around him like sunlight. As he joined her in the chores, he realized something remarkable. For the first time in years, he no longer felt alone on the ranch. Her presence, gentle and unassuming, had changed the energy of the place. Tasks that had once felt monotonous now seemed purposeful. The silence of the fields was no longer empty. It was filled with quiet companionship, trust, and a sense of shared responsibility. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel began noticing small, almost magical things. Lila would find lost tools, know the best place to store hay, and even anticipate the needs of the animals before he could act. There was no showiness in her actions, only a natural, effortless connection to the land and creatures around her. Daniel found himself silently studying her, marveling at her intuition and grace. It was during one quiet evening, as they sat watching the sun dip behind the distant hills, that Daniel finally spoke what he had been feeling, but afraid to admit. "I don't understand it," he said softly. "You've only been here a short time, and yet it feels like you belong, like you've always been part of this place." Lila turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Sometimes places remember people," she said quietly, "and sometimes people remember places. I don't know why, but this ranch, it feels like home." Daniel was taken aback. Her words were simple but struck something deep inside him. There was truth in them, a sense of recognition he could not explain. For the first time he wondered if her presence on the ranch was more than coincidence. As the night settled over the ranch, Daniel lay in bed, thinking about Lila and the strange comfort she brought. He realized that she had changed his life in ways he could not yet understand. His heart, long closed, was slowly opening, guided by the quiet patience, skill, and gentle spirit of the young woman who had arrived at his gate weeks ago. And though he did not yet know the future, he understood one thing clearly. Lila's presence on the ranch was not temporary. She had arrived for a reason, and her influence on his life was only beginning. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, now had a rhythm that included her. Daniel Harper knew that the days ahead would be different, full of surprises, challenges, and perhaps a connection he had thought he would never experience again. And as he drifted off to sleep, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a fragile but growing hope that life could be brighter, warmer, and filled with trust once more. Weeks had passed since Lila arrived at Daniel Harper's ranch, and life had begun to feel more alive than Daniel had experienced in many years. The animals were calmer, the land seemed more vibrant, and the air itself seemed lighter with her presence. Daniel often caught himself watching her as she moved through the fields with a quiet confidence that made everything she touched seem effortless. Her knowledge of the ranch continued to surprise him, and though he tried to ignore it, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something familiar about her, a recognition buried deep in his memory. One evening, Daniel decided to take a walk into the small town near the ranch. He needed supplies and wanted to check on some orders for the upcoming week. Lila, sensing he needed to go alone, stayed behind, tending to the animals. As Daniel walked through the streets, he noticed that the townspeople were whispering among themselves. It was unusual because Daniel was well known but rarely drew attention. Curious, he asked an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, what was happening. "They're talking about the girl," she said quietly. "Lila. People are wondering how she came to live here and why you'd let a stranger stay on your ranch." Daniel sighed. He had expected the whispers and knew better than to let them bother him. "She's not a stranger," he said firmly. "And she's staying because I agreed. That's all there is to it." Mrs. Thompson nodded, but Daniel could tell she still had questions. He smiled politely and continued walking toward the general store, pushing the thoughts aside. Yet in the back of his mind, he couldn't stop thinking about Lila's quiet presence and the strange sense of familiarity that lingered whenever he looked at her. That night, after returning to the ranch, Daniel found himself restless. He went out onto the porch, hoping the cool evening air would help him think. The sky was filled with stars, and the moon cast a soft light over the fields. He could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional chirp of crickets. Everything seemed normal, yet his thoughts were anything but. He thought about the first day Lila had arrived, how she had held his hand with that gentle familiarity. He thought about how easily she had adapted to the ranch, how instinctively she seemed to know the animals, the tools, and even the land itself. But most of all, he thought about how her presence had begun to soften his heart, the one part of him that had remained closed off since the loss of someone he had once loved. Daniel didn't realize how long he had been standing there until he heard a soft voice behind him. "Mr. Beer Harper?" Lila said, stepping quietly onto the porch. She held a small basket of freshly picked herbs, her movements calm and deliberate. "You're still awake?" Daniel asked, turning to look at her. "Yes," she said softly. "I thought you might like these. They're from the garden." Daniel took the basket, noticing the care with which she had gathered and arranged the herbs. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You've done well with the garden. I've never seen it look so alive." Lila smiled, but there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. "There's something I need to tell you," she said softly, her voice almost trembling. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He had a feeling this moment was coming, though he didn't know why. "What is it?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with curiosity. Lila took a deep breath and looked down at the basket in her hands. I think you might remember me," she began slowly. "Not now, not as I am, but from long ago, when I was a child." Daniel's brow furrowed. He was confused, but also intrigued. "I don't understand," he said carefully. "I was a little girl once," she continued. "Many years ago, my family, we were in a very difficult time. We had almost nothing, and your family, your kindness, saved us in ways I can never forget. I was very young, but I remember holding your hand, thanking you, and feeling safe for the first time in my life." The memory struck him like a lightning bolt. Years ago, there had been a harsh winter, and a poor family had struggled to survive in the nearby village. Daniel's father had insisted they help them, providing food, firewood, and shelter when no one else would. He remembered helping the little girl, holding her hand and feeling the gratitude in her eyes. But it had been so long, and he had never thought of it again. Could it really be her? Lila looked up, her eyes shining softly. "It's me," she said simply. "I never forgot your kindness. I never forgot that you treated me like I mattered, even when no one else did. That day, it changed my life. After losing my family, I searched for a place that felt like home, a place where I could feel safe again. And I found myself here, at this ranch, hoping that maybe you would remember me too." Daniel felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: shock, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of awe. He could not speak for several moments, simply staring at her, trying to reconcile the girl he had helped as a child with the young woman standing before him now. The resemblance was clear, the same gentle eyes, the same calm presence, but she had grown into a strong, capable, and kind person. Finally he spoke, his voice low and unsteady. I remember you. I didn't know. I never imagined." He trailed off, overwhelmed by the flood of memories and emotions. Lila stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his. "I didn't come to demand anything," she said softly. "I only wanted a place to stay, a chance to be safe, and maybe to be close to someone who once showed me kindness." He felt the weight of responsibility, but also a warmth he had not felt in years. The pieces fell into place. The instinctive knowledge of the ranch, the ease with which she had adapted, the deep sense of recognition he had felt the first day she arrived. It was all... She remembered him, and now he remembered her. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a surge of hope and understanding. This was not a random encounter. Fate, or perhaps the quiet guidance of life's small miracles, had brought her back to him. And now, standing under the soft light of the moon, he realized that the bond they shared had existed long before she had returned to the ranch. The next morning, Daniel found himself watching Lila with new eyes. He noticed the way she tended to the animals with patience, the way she moved with quiet confidence, and the subtle grace that had always seemed to surround her. He realized that she had not only remembered him, but she had carried that memory through years of hardship, shaping her into the kind, capable, and gentle person she had become. Over the following days, Daniel began sharing more of the ranch's history with her. He showed her secret paths through the fields, taught her small tricks for calming the horses, and even opened up about his own past, the losses he had endured, the solitude he had chosen, and the walls he had built around his heart. Lila listened quietly, never judging, never interrupting. Her presence was comforting, her understanding deep and patient. One afternoon, as they worked together repairing a broken fence, Daniel found himself speaking more freely than he had in years. "I never imagined I'd see you again," he said softly, hammering a post into place. "I remember holding your hand that day and feeling responsible for your safety. I didn't know how important it would become." Lila paused, resting her hands on the fence. "I never forgot it," she said gently. "That small act, It meant the world to me. It reminded me that kindness exists even when life is difficult, and it's why I came here. Because I trusted that the person I once knew would understand me again, Daniel felt his chest tighten. Her words were simple but powerful, reminding him that even small gestures could shape the course of a life. He realized that he had underestimated the impact of his own actions, and now he was witnessing the result. Leela, standing before him, strong, capable, and yet deeply connected to the memory of a moment they had shared so long ago. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Daniel and Lila stood side by side, looking out over the fields. The animals grazed peacefully, the wind whispered softly through the trees, and the ranch seemed alive with quiet harmony. Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for her presence, but for the reminder that life had a way of bringing people together in the most unexpected ways. For the first time, Daniel Harper allowed himself to truly see Leela, not just as a guest, not just as a stranger who had appeared at his gate, but as someone who had been connected to him all along. And he understood that this connection, rooted in kindness and memory, was a gift he could not ignore. The ranch, once quiet and predictable, now held a story of its own, a story of past kindness, lost families, and the quiet power of trust. And as Daniel and Leela prepared for the days ahead, they both knew that their bond was more than circumstance. It was recognition, understanding, and the quiet promise of new beginnings built on the foundation of a long-forgotten yet never-ending act of compassion. The days that followed Lila's revelation were quiet, yet charged with a new energy. Daniel Harper felt a strange mixture of relief, wonder, and uncertainty. On one hand, he was amazed to learn that Lila was the little girl he had helped so many years ago. On the other hand, he felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever before. Her presence reminded him of the past he had tried to forget, the kindness he had shown, and the deep connection they had unknowingly shared. Daniel tried to maintain his usual routine, but it wasn't easy. Everything felt different now. Feeding the animals, repairing fences, and tending the fields, all the familiar tasks were somehow brighter, more meaningful. Lila worked alongside him every day, moving with quiet confidence and a natural skill that Daniel still found remarkable. She never demanded attention or praised herself, but her presence made the ranch feel alive in a way it hadn't in years. Despite the comfort her presence brought, Daniel couldn't ignore the doubts creeping into his mind. He had spent so long alone that the idea of forming any close connection again was frightening. What if he allowed himself to trust too much? What if something went wrong? He had seen too many people leave, too many lives change unexpectedly, and he feared getting attached too soon. Lila, however, seemed to sense his unease. She never pushed or forced him to talk, and she never acted as if she expected anything beyond his kindness. Instead, she showed her trust quietly through her actions, helping with chores, caring for the animals, and bringing small moments of joy to the ranch. One afternoon, as they worked together mending a section of the fence, Daniel noticed her delicate attention to detail. She worked carefully, listening to the creak of the wood, watching the tension of the rope, and adjusting every nail with precision. "You have a way with these things," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "I didn't realize how capable you are. You've learned so quickly." Lila smiled softly, her eyes calm and thoughtful. "I've always watched and remembered," she said. "Even when I was little, I paid attention to what was important. The land, the animals, the people. They all leave marks on your memory if you notice them." Daniel paused, struck by the simplicity and depth of her words. She had endured so much in her life, yet she spoke with patience and understanding, never bitterness. Her perspective was different from his, yet it brought clarity he hadn't expected. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt that someone truly understood the quiet rhythm of life he had tried to protect. As the days turned into weeks, the townspeople began to notice the subtle change in Daniel as well, those who had once whispered about Lila being a stranger began to see her as part of the ranch, part of his life. She worked tirelessly, helped wherever needed, and treated everyone with respect and kindness. Slowly, their whispers shifted from doubt to admiration. Daniel, ever cautious, didn't pay much attention to their opinions, but he couldn't help noticing the way Lila's presence brought a quiet warmth to the people around her. Despite the growing trust between them, Daniel still struggled with his own hesitation. He worried that forming a closer bond with Lila might be wrong or premature. He had not allowed anyone into his heart for so long, and the thought of opening up again was both frightening and exhilarating. Every time he looked at her, he felt a pull he could not explain, a connection that had begun years ago but was only now becoming clear. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills and painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, Daniel and Lila walked together to check on the cattle grazing at the far side of the field. The air was cool, and the faint scent of wildflowers filled the space between them. Daniel felt a quiet peace, yet underneath it was the fluttering of nerves he hadn't felt in years. "You seem more comfortable here than most people would be," he said carefully, breaking the silence. Lila looked at him, her calm eyes reflecting the sunset. "I feel like I belong here," she said simply. "I've been searching for a place like this for a long time. A place where kindness exists and people notice the little things. This ranch. It feels right." Daniel nodded slowly, feeling the truth in her words. Her trust in him was genuine, and yet he couldn't ignore his own fear of letting go. He had been alone for so long that sharing his life, even a small part of it, felt like stepping into unknown territory. And yet he felt drawn to her, not out of obligation or expectation, but because her presence made the world seem brighter, fuller, and safer. Over the next few days, Daniel began sharing more of the ranch's history with Lila. He told her about the small tricks for calming the horses, the secret paths through the fields, and the times when the land had tested his patience. Lila listened quietly, absorbing everything with care and respect. She asked questions only when necessary, never interrupting, and always learning from observation. Daniel began to notice something remarkable. The more he shared, the more comfortable he felt opening up about himself. Her quiet attention made it easier for him to speak freely, and he realized he had not trusted anyone in this way for a very long time. One afternoon, they worked together repairing a broken section of the fence near the barn. Daniel was hammering a post into place when he paused, feeling the weight of what he wanted to say. "Leela," he began, hesitant, "I need to tell you something. I've been alone for a long time, and I'm not used to letting anyone in. But I want to try. With you." Lila looked at him, her expression soft and understanding. She reached out and placed her hand lightly on his arm. "I understand," she said gently. "I don't expect anything from you, except that we trust each other and care for the ranch together. The rest we can discover slowly." Daniel felt a surge of relief and gratitude. Her words were simple, yet they held a promise of patience and understanding that he had longed for without realizing it. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that included someone else, not just as a helper or guest, but as a companion and friend. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. Daniel began to notice small things about Lila that made her presence even more comforting. The way she laughed softly while feeding the chickens, the careful way she tended to the horses, and the gentle encouragement she offered when he faced a difficult task. She had a natural ability to make the ranch feel like home, not just for herself but for him as well. At the same time, Daniel's doubts continued to surface occasionally. He worried about what might happen if he allowed himself to care too deeply. He feared that the past might repeat itself, that he might lose someone he had grown attached to, and that the fragile trust they were building could be broken. Yet, every time he looked at Lila, every time she offered a quiet smile or a word of encouragement, he felt that his doubts were slowly fading. Her presence was steady, reliable, and kind, a reminder that trust could be earned and cherished. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the porch, Daniel found himself speaking more openly than he had in years. "I've been through a lot," he said quietly. "I've lost people I loved, and I've tried to protect myself by keeping everyone at a distance, but I feel different with you. You make me feel safe again." Lila reached out and gently placed her hand over his. "You are safe," she said softly, "and I don't want anything from you except trust. We'll face everything together, step by step." Daniel felt his chest tighten. Her words were not just comforting, they were a bridge between the past and the present, between fear and hope. He realized that the bond they were forming was not just about friendship or gratitude. It was about mutual understanding, patience, and the quiet recognition of a connection that had existed for years. The next morning, Daniel woke earlier than usual, as he often did, and found Lila already outside tending to the garden. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the fields, and the air was crisp with the promise of a new day. He watched her quietly, marveling at how naturally she had become part of the ranch, part of his life, and part of his heart. For the first time in years, Daniel Harper allowed himself to hope, not recklessly, not without caution, but with the gentle certainty that trust, patience, and kindness could build something lasting. He realized that Lila's presence was more than a coincidence. It was a gift, a chance to rediscover connection, joy, and companionship in a life that had once seemed closed off and lonely. And as the ranch hummed quietly with the life of animals, wind, and sunlight, Daniel knew that the days ahead would bring challenges, questions, and perhaps even fears. But they would also bring hope, trust, and the slowly growing bond between him and the young woman who had returned to his life, not as a stranger, but as someone he had unknowingly been waiting for all along. The days on the ranch had grown warmer with the approach of spring. The fields were lush with new grass, the trees were full of leaves, and the animals moved with a calm energy that reflected the change in the air. For Daniel Harper, life felt different than it had in years. Filled with a quiet joy he hadn't allowed himself to experience since the loss that had closed his heart long ago. Lila's presence had brought more than companionship. It had brought hope, warmth, and the sense that life could be gentle again. Despite the peace, Daniel's thoughts were often restless. He knew that the trust and bond he shared with Lila had grown deeper than mere friendship, but he still struggled with how to express it. Words often failed him, and the quiet rhythm of the ranch life made him uncertain of when, or even if, the time was right to acknowledge the feelings he had spent so long hiding. He feared missteps, worrying that if he acted too soon, he might disturb the fragile harmony they had created together. Lila, on the other hand, seemed unbothered by time or expectations. She continued her work on the ranch with patience and dedication, moving through her days with a calm grace that Daniel admired deeply. She never pressed him to speak, never demanded more than the bond they were building naturally, but she gave him small signs of her trust and care. A shared smile over breakfast, a gentle word while tending the animals, or a soft glance across the fields that seemed to understand his unspoken thoughts. One morning Daniel found her in the garden, kneeling in the soil as she carefully tended to the young vegetables, sprouting in neat rows. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of soft orange and pink. He watched her quietly, noting the precision of her movements and the serenity in her expression. For a moment, he allowed himself to simply enjoy the sight of her, free from the worries and doubts that often clouded his mind. "Good morning," he said softly, stepping onto the path. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," she replied, looking up with a gentle smile. There was something in her eyes that made him pause, a quiet understanding that went beyond words. He nodded and moved closer, standing beside her in silence. The air was cool and still, the world seeming to hold its breath as they worked side by side. For a while neither spoke, each absorbed in their own tasks, but aware of the presence of the other. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Lila, I've been thinking," he began carefully, unsure of how to continue. "These past months, you've changed this place. You've changed me. I don't know if I can find the right words, but I need you to know how important you are to me." Lila looked at him, her expression calm but attentive. She did not speak immediately, allowing him to continue. "You've brought life back to this ranch," he said. "Not just the land or the animals, me too. I've been alone for so long, and I didn't know how much I needed someone until you came. And now, I can't imagine the ranch or my life without you." For the first time, Daniel allowed the depth of his emotions to show. His voice was soft, but steady, filled with honesty and sincerity. He waited, unsure of what she would say, but hoping that the trust they had built could carry him through this vulnerable moment. Lila's eyes softened and she reached out, placing her hand gently on his. "I've never asked for anything," she said quietly, "except to be safe, to belong somewhere. And you've given me more than I ever imagined. You've given me trust, kindness, and a home." Daniel felt a weight lift from his chest. Her words were not just comforting, they were a mirror of the feelings he had struggled to express. In that moment he understood that the bond they shared had grown into something deeper, something that was rooted in years of memory, trust, and mutual care. Over the next days, they worked together on the ranch with a new understanding between them. Tasks that had once felt routine now held a sense of shared purpose. They repaired fences, tended the animals, and planted new crops, each action carrying the unspoken acknowledgement of their connection. Daniel found himself smiling more often, laughing at small moments of humor, and even allowing himself to relax in ways he hadn't in years. Lila, in turn, flourished in the calm acceptance of his trust, her gentle presence bringing balance and warmth to every corner of the ranch. The townspeople, too, began to notice the change. Those who had once whispered doubts now spoke with admiration. Lila's quiet strength, kindness, and dedication had earned their respect, and Daniel's own demeanor had softened in ways that reflected the trust and bond he shared with her. The ranch had become not just a place of work, but a home filled with quiet joy and mutual care. One evening, Daniel decided to show Lila a special part of the ranch. He led her to a small hill overlooking the fields, where the sunset cast a golden glow over the landscape. The animals grazed peacefully in the distance, and the wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. "This place has always been important to me," Daniel said quietly. "It's where I find peace, where I've always come to think. But now, It's even more important, because it's where I found you again. Lila turned to him, her eyes reflecting the warm light of the setting sun. I feel the same, she said softly. This place, it feels like home. Not just the land, but the people, the animals, and you. I feel like I've belonged here all along, even before I came back. Daniel felt a deep surge of emotion. The recognition, trust, and patience they had shared had blossomed into something powerful, unspoken, but undeniable. He realized that their bond was no longer about past events or doubts. It was about the present and the future they could create together. Over the following weeks, they continued their routines, but every moment was tinged with the quiet joy of shared understanding. They cooked together, fed the animals side by side, and even found time for small walks through the fields, sharing stories, memories, and dreams. Daniel began to notice small gestures from Lila that he had once overlooked. The way she would pause to watch the sunrise, the care she showed in arranging tools, and the way she encouraged him to rest when he worked too hard. These small acts carried the depth of her character, her understanding of life, and her appreciation for the world around her. One morning, Daniel woke early and found Lila already outside, gathering eggs from the chicken coop. The sun was rising, spilling light across the fields in a golden haze. He watched her quietly, feeling a calm certainty in his heart. He realized that he no longer feared attachment or change. Lila had become a part of his life in a way that was natural, gentle, and enduring. There's something I want to say. Not just about the ranch, about us. She turned to him, her expression attentive and patient. What is it? Daniel took a deep breath. I don't want to lose this us. I want you to stay, not because you need a place, but because I want you here. I want us to be together, to share life, work, and everything the future may bring. Will you accept that? Lila's eyes glistened with warmth. She stepped closer and took his hands in hers, the same gentle recognition from the first day she had arrived. I don't need to think about it, she said softly. I've already chosen. I belong here, with you, and I've wanted this for a long time. Daniel felt a joy he hadn't experienced in years, a relief and happiness that filled every corner of his being. For the first time, he understood that love, trust, and companionship were not burdens to fear, but gifts to cherish. The past, with its memories and hardships, had led to this moment, a beginning rooted in patience, kindness, and the quiet recognition of two lives connected long ago. From that day on, the ranch truly became a home. Daniel and Lila worked together as partners, caring for the land, the animals, and each other. The routines that had once been solitary were now shared, each task a reflection of trust and understanding. The townspeople admired the quiet partnership, often stopping by to offer congratulations or lend a hand, but Daniel and Lila focused on the life they were building together day by day. Seasons changed, but the bond between them only grew stronger. Winters that had once felt cold and lonely were now filled with warmth, laughter, and shared moments by the fire. Summers were bright with work and shared joy, and the ranch flourished under their care. Daniel had learned to trust again, and Lila had found the home she had long searched for. Together they discovered that life could be gentle, fulfilling, and full of hope, even after years of hardship. And so, under the wide-open skies of the ranch, with the land stretching endlessly around them, and the animals moving peacefully through the fields, Daniel and Lila began a life together. A life built on trust, kindness, and the quiet recognition that sometimes hearts remember what time and distance cannot erase. Their story, rooted in a single act of past kindness, had come full circle, and a new chapter of hope, love, and companionship had begun.